How did you die?
We don't remember. We're scared, Finn.
Unnecessary sequels are a dime a dozen in the horror genre. For every Aliens or Evil Dead 2 that builds meaningfully on its predecessor, there's a Blair Witch 2 or Exorcist 2 that feels more like a cash grab than a continuation. So when Blumhouse announced that The Black Phone, Scott Derrickson's 2021 hit about a child killer, his victims, and one very haunted telephone was getting a sequel, Ethan Hawke's sadistic villain, the Grabber, was thoroughly dispatched at the end of the first film, and Finny, Mason Thames, had escaped both the basement and his trauma. What more was there to say? It turns out Derrickson and co-writer C. Robert Cargill did have more to say, or at least more to explore. Black Phone 2 doesn't feel like a lazy retread so much as an expansion, one that attempts to broaden the mythos of the Grabber while deepening the emotional lives of its surviving characters. The result is a film that's as ambitious as it is uneven, part ghost story, part coming-of-age drama, and part meta-commentary on the very act of revisiting past horrors. It's fun to a point, but also haunted by the same question that inspired it. Did we really need to pick up this call? A sequel that shifts the focus. Set a few years after the first film, Black Phone 2 finds Finny and his sister Gwen, Madeline McGraw, still reeling from their brush with evil. Finny, now older and quieter, tries to live a normal life, while Gwen's psychic abilities, hinted at in the original, have intensified, connecting her not only to the Grabber's lingering spirit, but to something darker rooted in their own family history. Through Gwen's visions, we learn that their late mother may have passed down her supernatural sensitivity, creating a generational thread that ties their trauma to something beyond the mortal world. The story takes the siblings to Alpine Lake, a snowbound camp where Gwen's powers begin to stir again. She and Finny are joined by Gwen's new boyfriend, Ernesto, Miguel Mora, a warm but skeptical presence who grounds the film's more fantastical elements. What begins as a simple winter retreat quickly devolves into a psychological and supernatural nightmare when Gwen starts dreaming of the Grabber, dreams captured in grainy Super 8, a deliberate nod to Derrickson's Sinister, and it becomes clear that the killer's influence has not been laid to rest. The Grabber returns, in spirit and style. Hawke's Grabber is back, though not quite in the flesh. His presence is spectral, manifesting through Gwen's dreams in the haunted grounds of Alpine Lake. Derrickson cleverly plays with the boundaries between dream and reality, blurring them until even Gwen questions what's real. This approach allows Hawke to appear in creatively unnerving ways. Reflections in cracked mirrors, voices over the phone, and fleeting glimpses through the icy fog that rolls over the frozen lake. The effect is both creepy and stylish, and it gives Black Phone 2 a personality distinct from its predecessor's gritty realism. However, this shift comes with trade-offs. Because the Grabber is now more of an omnipresent ghost than a tangible monster, the film loses some of the visceral fear that made the original so effective. Hawke's physical menace, his posture, his breathing, his unsettling mask work, was central to the Black Phone's horror. Here he's more of an abstract idea, which undercuts some of his power. That said, Hawke's commitment remains total. He imbues every whisper and appearance with malevolent glee, hinting that the Grabber might be evolving into a kind of modern-day Freddy Krueger if the franchise continues. Themes of trauma and legacy. At its core, Black Phone 2 is about what happens after survival, how people carry trauma, and whether they can truly escape it. Finny's quiet guilt over killing his captor mixes with Gwen's growing fear that her powers will consume her. The film suggests that trauma isn't something you can simply overcome. It's something you learn to live with, even when it manifests in supernatural ways. Derrickson and Cargill use the sibling dynamic effectively, turning Gwen and Finny into emotional anchors amid the film's wilder moments. Unfortunately, the screenplay doesn't always handle its ideas with subtlety. Some dialogue lands with the grace of a sledgehammer. You can't outrun the past, Finny, and the emotional beats can feel telegraphed. But the performances elevate the material. McGraw in particular brings heart and determination to Gwen, who transitions from supporting character to psychic heroine with surprising ease. Thames, while more subdued this time around, grounds the story with quiet resilience. Camp, chaos, and Derrickson's direction, where Black Phone 2 shines brightest, is in its tonal daring. Derrickson embraces the absurdity of supernatural horror sequels, staging scenes that flirt with camp without ever tipping into parody. A sequence in which Gwen is hurled through a kitchen by unseen forces feels ripped from the Conjuring universe, while a later moment featuring the Grabber skating ominously across a frozen lake borders on self-aware spectacle. These moments shouldn't work, and sometimes they don't, but they're undeniably entertaining. Visually, Derrickson remains a master of texture and atmosphere. The film's snowy isolation contrasts beautifully with the gritty urban decay of the first Black Phone, giving it a fresh look that mirrors its broader narrative ambitions. Cinematographer Brett Jukiewicz captures the frostbitten chill of Alpine Lake with stark beauty, while the Super 8 sequences lend a grainy nostalgia that makes the horror feel almost intimate. The editing, too, oscillates between dreamlike flow and chaotic energy, creating a sense of disorientation that suits the film's themes. Expanding the mythology, for better or worse. Every horror sequel faces a dilemma: double down on what worked or reinvent the wheel. Black Phone 2 tries to do both. It expands on the grabber's mythology, tying his evil to a cycle of generational suffering and psychic inheritance. There are hints that he wasn't just a random killer, but part of something more metaphysical, a dark echo feeding on trauma itself. It's an intriguing idea that could set the stage for a larger franchise, but the film only half commits to it, leaving threads dangling by the finale. This push to build lore gives Black Phone 2 a mythic quality, but also weighs it down. By explaining too much, the film risks demystifying what made the grabber terrifying in the first place. In the first movie, he was simply unknowable, a monster lurking in plain sight. Here, the attempt to rationalize his evil through psychic and familial connections makes him feel smaller, even as the world around him gets bigger. Performances and supporting cast. Beyond the core trio, the supporting cast adds color and texture to the snowbound nightmare. Damian Beecher stands out as Mondo, the camp's grizzled caretaker, who provides both comic relief and tragic gravitas. His scenes hint at a broader local folklore surrounding the grabber's victims, a clever world-building touch that the movie could have explored further. Miguel Mora's Ernesto, meanwhile, brings charm and humanity, though his character often feels like a narrative device to tether Gwen to reality. Hawke's limited screen time is bittersweet. While he remains magnetic whenever he appears, one can't help but feel he's underused. The decision to shift focus away from him makes thematic sense, but comes at the cost of intensity. There's a version of Black Phone 2 where the grabber truly becomes the series' Freddy Krueger, a recurring nightmare figure, each film exploring a different manifestation of his evil. This isn't quite that film, but it gets close enough to make the idea tantalizing. Verdict: fun, flawed, and frightening enough. In the end, Black Phone 2 is an undeniably entertaining sequel that manages to be both too much and not enough. It expands the world of the Black Phone while losing some of its lean, suffocating terror. Its ambition is admirable, its scares occasionally effective, and its tone refreshingly weird for a mainstream horror follow-up. But it's also burdened by cliché and a tendency to over-explain what was once chillingly simple. Still, there's plenty to enjoy. The performances are strong, the visuals are haunting, and the film's campy streak gives it personality in a landscape of cookie-cutter horror sequels. Derrickson clearly loves this world, perhaps too much to let it rest in peace, and his enthusiasm shines through even when the script stumbles. Whether that's enough to justify another sequel will depend on how audiences respond to this one. For now, Black Phone 2 stands as a fun, flawed return to a nightmare that maybe didn't need revisiting. But since we picked up the call, it's hard to hang up. If Blumhouse lets the next installment lean fully into the surreal dream horror hinted at here, the grabber might just ring again with purpose.